Today in the EU, Europe's desperate bid to shape Ukraine's Trump deal in Munich.
Every European country by now understands that we need to do more for our defense, we need to do more for Ukraine. But the other topic on the side is the war that is going on right now, and whether you are offering to the aggressor everything he wants.
Last weekend, Munich hosted the world's premier geopolitical forum amid shifting alliances and rising tensions across country lines. It's in the Bavarian capital the leaders convened to debate on everything from global governance to climate security. But the real question for Brussels remains how the ongoing war in Ukraine will end, and on whose terms. Will Europe play a role in shaping the outcome, or will it be forced to accept a deal dictated by Washington? We'll tell you what we know after this weekend. Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Giada Santana, and this is Today in the EU.
Hi, I'm Today in the EU's producer Charles Cohen. Let me give you a quick recap before we start the interview. Things started on the wrong foot on Friday. 2 days earlier, Trump went on social media and announced he had a one-on-one call with Putin where they agreed to start negotiations immediately. Trump's post on Truth Social sent shockwaves across Europe. This unilateral move sparked fears that Zelensky would be left out of negotiations. And on Thursday, NATO's Secretary General Rutte gave a press conference where he repeated the usual, that EU member states need to step up their defense contributions and production.
We need more military capabilities. And for that, we need significantly more defense spending. Our continued freedom and prosperity depend on it. We are producing more and faster than at any time in decades. But we can and must do more. We need to shift to a wartime mindset.
To understand how the Europeans played their cards, I'm on a call with Euractiv's chief diplomatic correspondent, Alexandra Brzozowski, in Munich. Hi, Alex.
Hi, Charles.
So, Alex, this is not your first time at the Munich conference. Did it feel like the stakes were higher this year?
It's true. I mean, I've been here for the last 7 years, maybe excluding COVID, but it certainly feels that the stakes are much higher this time, especially maybe higher than they were expected to be, because start of the peace negotiations with Putin on Wednesday really raised them, and also the expectations of Europeans that they could actually hear what the Americans are planning to do with Ukraine, because I think the last few days have left them guessing. They were very mixed signals, and I think many of them expected that, they will come to Munich and kind of lay out their plans in some way.
And on that, Zelensky has been appealing to European leaders to act faster and stronger at every Munich conference since 2022.
This link should get stronger right now, so that the next year we would gather here in Munich for the First Security Post-War Conference under the condition of free Ukraine, free Europe. 2024 must become a time for a full restoration of a rules-based world order. Among us, there is no one for whom the ongoing war in Europe does not pose a threat. This is Russia's war against any rules at all.
So, has the tone changed since Trump's phone call with Putin a few days ago?
I would say actually Zelensky's tone is largely the same. I mean, he's calling for the same things, calling for urgency, not criticizing Trump really too much, only maybe with the addition that he actually told Europeans this time to get their act together a bit more on their own defense. So he called for armed forces of Europe. So I think there was a bit more urgency appealing to the Europeans. But at the same time, I think the focus was very much on the sideline talks, on the meetings that they had bilaterally. So actually, when Zelensky arrived at the Munich Security Conference, he told us reporters in the doorstep that he was prepared to engage with Putin's peace initiative and eventually also meet with Putin directly, but this only after there was actually an agreed plan with Trump. So I think, again, that's the same kind of narrative, that there was the expectation that there will be some kind of plans already laid out.
So Zelensky once again turned to Europeans, but also to the US, and he met with JD Vance on Friday. What came out of the conversation?
So it was a 40-minute meeting between Zelensky's team and the US delegation here in Munich. It produced, however, no major announcements and actually very few assurances. It's very clear that Zelensky is under pressure to keep himself at the table. So far, this has worked. What he got in Munich is somewhat a reassurance by Trump's people that he will be involved in the talks, maybe not at the first stage, but definitely in the process. However, at the same time, I think there's also the attempt to try and see what the trade-off would be. Behind closed doors, there was reportedly an offer by the Trump administration to trade half of the country's mineral resources in exchange for US support, but this offer didn't really have any security guarantees, according to the Ukrainians. So that didn't quite work out. So it was a first meeting. Vance said that they will continue talking, so it will have to be seen probably what comes out of the first Trump-Putin meeting to see what else is being put on the table.
You've hinted that Trump's peace plan earlier in this conversation, because Europeans were hoping for clarification on Trump's peace plan in Munich. Did we get any clarification on that? Do we know what's in it?
Well, I think they were hoping for this peace plan since the election in November, but I think what we can see is that they haven't received any details.
Does it even exist at this stage?
Technically, I think at this stage there is no clear peace plan yet. So Europeans have been hoping for any details on that since November, since Trump got elected, but over the past 2 months there has been very little known about this. Instead, I think what we saw this week in Munich and in the days leading up to Munich was a flurry of mixed messages from the Trump entourage that was presented on the Putin encounter that will happen this week. I think it didn't really help in some way also that Trump's Ukraine envoy Kellogg sent quite mixed messages about what the process for the peace plan compilation will be. I mean, he said, for example, the Europeans won't be part of those peace talks because the Americans want to avoid a larger group that would negotiate, which has not worked the last time there were negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. And we will have to see also what he will ask for when he embarks on this tour around NATO countries to discuss what allies would commit. I mean, one of the factors is also that Kellogg is not really part of the negotiation team. So it's a question what leverage he actually has. But in the end, I think what this weekend has shown is that the Europeans talk about Trump-proofing plans that they have to come up with. But so far, there has also been no European plan. So in some way, this would have been a moment to discuss substance, maybe already have something at hand. But it's clear that that has not happened yet. So in this case, the European side actually needs to come up with any kind of proposal now.
But so should we take what Kellogg's is saying at face value? Like that the EU wouldn't be part of negotiations? Is it something that European states should be concerned about?
I think they definitely should be concerned about it. But taking the comments that we saw, I think, in the past few days as at face value is a bit difficult. I mean, we've seen very mixed messages, especially when it comes to Vance, Rubio, and Kellogg. In the end, what matters is Trump's voice. So what we hear from the Americans is that they expect Europeans to come up with a plan or to come up with any kind of input that they could bring to the table. And then I think afterwards there will be a discussion of who can actually sit at this table. But this table is also a very artificial concept. I mean, at the moment, there is no table.
As you've pointed out, as of today, there is no European peace plan or European project. So what did European leaders have to say in Munich?
The main bottom line we've been hearing from them for the last 3 days was that Ukraine and Europeans need to be part of those negotiations. And they've also tried to make sure that they repeated the talking points that Europe is actually stepping up on defense and so on, that they can carry a burden in what is supposed to come. But all of that, I mean, compared to Vance's speech, and I think the shock and anger that came out of that sounded rather forced.
And as the conference wrapped up yesterday, and we still don't know what's going to come next with the negotiations with Putin or with Trump. I mean, it's been reported that Trump's team will start peace talks in Saudi Arabia, but there's a bit of confusion over, whether this involves Zelensky or not, or if he's actually aware of it. But one thing that we know for sure is that European leaders called an emergency meeting that will take place today in Paris. So what are you expecting to come out of this meeting?
It looks a bit like these are Munich hangover talks. I mean, France will host this emergency meeting of several EU leaders. I mean, it's by far not all of them. It's likely to include the Weimar Three, the UK, the heads of the EU institutions and NATO, and maybe some other key leaders that have been involved in those various talk formats that we've been seeing over the past few months. But what they're actually meant to discuss is concrete plans on European defense, regardless of future US engagement, and also plans on how they can make sure that European input is kind of taken into account into the peace talks. Whether they will succeed is another question. And also how European input could be taken into account for Ukraine peace talks, essentially trying to come up with some sort of offer. There has been media reports that the Americans have requested details about weapons, money, peacekeeping troops last week from European capitals to kind of ask Europeans to draw up what they could be contributing. But it's a very uneasy topic for most of them, as there is relatively no agreement on how to set these things up, especially when it comes to the peacekeeping troops. I think after the mixed messages we have heard from the American side this last week, whether those troops would be protected by NATO's Article 5, whether, how much of those forces would be needed. All of that is kind of still up in the air. So it would be time to start discussing it.
I guess we'll have to see what EU leaders agree on in Paris then. Thank you, Alex.
Thanks. See you in Brussels.
This was Euractiv's podcast, Today in the EU. Sound design by Miriam Sáenz de Tejada, research and production by Charles Cohen. Visit Euractiv to stay on top of the latest news and sign up for our newsletters. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and your favorite streaming platforms. Don't forget to subscribe and give us a review. It will really help us spread the word about our work. See you tomorrow. As part of our commitment to accuracy, inclusion, and transparency, Euractiv is part of the Trust Project.